We pulling?
Hey, I'm Zax, and here's our guide to Sprocketmonger Lockenstock, the 5th boss in Liberation of Undermine. This guide is brought to you by Wowhead and their raid cheat sheets, which we'll tell you more about right after the boss. Also, big thank you to our supporters on Patreon. Hope you'll enjoy all the Patreon exclusive content we've got coming out this tier, like mythic walkthrough guides and more. Alright, so Sprocketmonger has 2 alternating phases. The fight is entirely single target, and you'll want a Bloodlust on pull. The room you fight the boss in is kinda cool. It has these 3 long conveyor belts that go through the whole room, and these 2 little conveyor belts going sideways in the middle. The little ones are more dangerous because they're always moving and they have holes of death on either side of them and traps on them, so I'd recommend staying off those if you can, but the long ones are usually safe to be on. Phase 1 has a bunch of mechanics that are all super straightforward, so I'll just kind of rapid fire through them until we get to the more interesting ones. When the boss electrifies sections of the room with wire transfer, don't stand in the lightning. He changes the sections that are electrified throughout the fight, so you do have to relocate every once in a while, but the patterns are always the same each pull. And the electricity doesn't actually cover the conveyor belts, so you can use those to get around. The Sonic Baboom cast is just raid-wide damage and a dot that the healers have to deal with. When the boss puts these marks on random players with Screw Up, they spawn these drills under their feet for a few seconds, and everyone has to avoid them or else you get stunned. For the tanks, the boss's melee swings apply stacks of a debuff that increases damage taken and slows them. And then every once in a while, the boss casts Pyro Party Pack on the tank, which gives them a bomb they have to run out of the raid with because it does fall off damage after a few seconds. The stacking slow is supposed to make running out more difficult, but every tank has a movement ability to make it pretty easy, so the tanks just need to taunt swap every time this is cast. And I'd recommend that the tank with the bomb should always go to the far ends of the room because everyone else will tend to stay closer to the middle. Then there's the interesting ones, which are the 3 inventions the boss has. Every once in a while, the boss casts Activate Inventions, and a few seconds before that, you can see the inventions being moved into place on one of the long conveyor belts. Once he finishes the cast, the invention does its mechanic. The first one that happens is from these pylon things that are always on the left conveyor belt. They blast fire beams across the room, but those are pretty easy to avoid. The second one is from these cannons that are always on the right belt. They shoot rockets across the room in random directions, which are a little bit more difficult to dodge, but it helps a lot to be on the opposite side of the room from them. And the third one is from these magnets that are always in the middle. They pull everyone toward them for a few seconds and stun anyone that touches them, so you just run against the pull. These inventions aren't so bad at first, but they get a little sketchy later on. On Heroic, there's one other big mechanic in phase 1, but it takes a little bit to explain, so I'm going to put it at the end. When the boss gets to full energy after a couple minutes, he starts phase 2, where he yeets everybody to the entrance of the room and flies to the opposite side of the room and starts a long channel, and the raid has to survive for about 20 seconds while the whole room is electrified, all the conveyor belts are moving, with the middle one even having some traps on it, all these little circles are spawning on the ground to dodge, and the boss is pulsing raid-wide damage and heal absorbs. The boss does take damage during all this, so the melee can see which side the boss is going to and run up the conveyor belt on that side so they can reach him and get some damage in, and the ranged can run up the middle and get in range of the boss and then stand on the little edge of the conveyor belt where you don't get moved, but you also don't get electrified, assuming that doesn't change from testing. Once this is over, it's back to phase 1, but the boss gets a damage buff after each phase 2, and more importantly, he upgrades one of his inventions, and now you can get multiple inventions at the same time. The first one that gets upgraded is the fire beams, which are now huge void beams that take up way more space. And now these get activated anytime he activates another invention, so you have to dodge the rockets while avoiding the big void beams, and then you have to run against the magnets while avoiding the beams, which are both pretty tough combos. Just try to keep an eye on where the pylons are beforehand so you can pre-move to a safe spot, and be on the opposite side from the rockets to give yourself more time to dodge. After another phase 2, the rockets get upgraded to be void orbs that do some raid-wide damage if they hit anyone, and they are super hard to see through the void beams. And what happens after the third phase 2 is a mystery, but it's probably pretty tough. That's everything for normal, but now it's finally time for that one heroic mechanic that happens in phase 1, and it is a doozy. Every once in a while, the boss spawns 4 of these mines on the ground in set locations, and you have to stagger setting these off because they explode all at once if they're left alone for too long, and because setting one off does damage to the raid and gives everyone a debuff for 2 seconds that increases damage taken from another mine blowing up. But you also have to rotate the players that step on each mine because stepping on one does damage to that player player and gives them a long debuff that massively increases the damage they take from stepping on another mine. In testing, these spawned 3 times in each phase 1, so you need to assign 12 players to be in charge of setting off their mine in the assigned order, preferably ranged DPS or healers. And depending on which sections of the room are electrified, the mines can either spawn in a square, like the first set, or in 2 split groups, like the second set. And you need a pattern to blow them up in so 2 don't get set off at the same time. So in the square version, I'd recommend starting top left, looking at the wall, and going clockwise. And in the split version, I'd recommend starting on the one toward the wall in the section the boss is in, and then just going down the line from there. The last one being super far away from the boss. Whatever pattern you end up choosing, just make sure everybody's on the same page, and you can put world markers on all the spawns ahead of time to help with calling stuff out too. And that's pretty much it. For our recaps this tier, check out the new and improved Wowhead cheat sheets, a quick and easy way to get all of the key info for every boss in Liberation of Undermine, including concise strategies, key assignments, and any pro tips you might need. So check out the cheat sheet link in the description. And thanks again to our supporters on Patreon. We've got a ton of Patreon exclusive content coming this tier, like extended heroic guides, mythic walkthrough guides, and a weekly podcast. So check out that link below. See you next time.